Last part on the topic 10, we're going to start talking about groups. And clearly, here we're into an area where there are huge difference between Western and Asian context, or independent or individualistic and collectivistic cultures. Okay. So, just as a reminder, because we always have to keep this fresh in our mind about the different models of groups. That is, the in group for the people from more of a Western, more of an American perspective, the independent way, is flexible, very flexible. Groups can shift, groups can change. But remember, the group membership is relatively solid for more of an interdependent context. So let's keep that thought in mind. So it turns out that in people with both independent and interdependent cultural contexts, they view in-group members different from out-group members very much. And it turns out that we trust our in-group members a bit more than we do our out-group members, but it's just kind of a different notion. But you find in interdependent cultural contexts, trust for strangers tends to be lower, tends to be. And this is pretty rough because trust towards strangers is almost the basis of economic development, right? Um, that's what investing is. Investing is, I'm going to give you $1,000. I trust you're not going to run off with it. I trust you're going to take that and use it to, so the in everything to do with economic growth requires trust in strangers. All right, and in Western contexts, we can create in groups pretty easily. One of the earliest studies in social psychology was Sharif's Robbers Cave study, where he took these boys that were going to a summer camp, and they rode the bus over to the summer camp. As they got off the bus, he just, as they came off, the first kid, oh, you're a grizzly, and the second kid, you're a rattler. You're a grizzly, you're a rattler. And then he put them up, and so quickly he put them in these different cabins. It was just, random. And within a day or two, they just were such strong in-group members. They definitely preferred each other. Definitely hated the out-group. I mean, they were. It was a powerful study, by the way. It was a powerful study. But I've also seen this sense of in-group and out-group created pretty straightforward. I had this one time in China. I was in the airport, Beijing, coming back to DFW or something, and they were saying the flight is oversold, and if you'd like to, take a later flight, then we're offering $2,000. My only question was, is that 2,000 American dollars? Holy shit. It was 2,000 American dollars. Sign me up. All right, it's travel credit, of course, but sign me up. And so then what happened was they took, it was about 12 of us. And, it was actually pretty big deal. They had to take our passports because we had already technically checked out of China, so we had checked back into China. It was a very strange process. But they put us up at this amazing hotel. I mean, it was a beautiful buffet, and the 10 of us sat around together, and it was like we had known each other's forever. It was just such a cool experience, and it was good fun. And it was the same thing. It was just randomly these 10 people happened to be jumping off the flight. Okay? Well, it turns out that Westerners appear to have their group identity based on common features that they possess. So, say for example, you and your classmates are all Texas Wesleyan students, and so you share something in common, some shared essence with Texas Wesleyan. And this is sort of like a patriotism or some kind of a school spirit or something that connects you together. East Asian groups seem to have group identity based on connections. And so what happens is two students at Texas Wesleyan don't necessarily share group thoughts with each other because they're both Wesleyan students, but instead that they have shared common connections and relationships. And this is something I've seen in Asian contexts. When two people will meet each other, they're going to start asking each other all kinds of questions, just looking to find connections. And my wife found one of these one time, and she found somebody that went to the same university as her on the other side of the world and graduated 1 year apart. So, it's out there. And so what you find, is in a fascinating study. They were doing a game of trust. Will you trust a stranger? And so what happened was in the Americans and the Japanese, it was would you trust a stranger? And if it was somebody from your own university, both the American and the Japanese said, yeah, I'll trust them. Okay. But if it was a stranger from another university where you didn't know anybody, in both cases it was no, I wouldn't trust them. But all of a sudden, if it's a stranger at a different university, but you have an acquaintance at that university, in particular, you see the Japanese people here saying, yeah, I would trust them. And the notion is because they have this, the way they define their relationship, they're looking for connections. Well, if I know so and so over that university, then they're in this club and they know that person who had a class with so and so. Aha! I know this person. So it's kind of a different way of thinking for sure. When it comes to relationships, we can talk about four basic formats. Communal sharing is community, at its extreme, communism. Communal sharing is this notion that everyone has equal access to resources. You split resources evenly. In other cultures, however, they have relationships like authority ranking. So whoever is highest gets the most resources, gets the most privileges, etc. Equality is sort of an interesting concept that, if you give me one, I give you one. If you give me one, I give you one. But if the final form of relationship, which is very transactional, is a market relationship. That is market pricing. There's matching, and that's the kind of relationship you have at Starbucks. If I give you $5, then you give me a coffee. I'm sure $5 doesn't buy a coffee anymore, but it's hypothetical, okay? And so these four relationships can really exist at the same time. So if you look at family, you could find that, number one, communal sharing, everybody can eat as much as they want until they're satisfied. Number two, the parent's opinion is over the top of the child's opinion. Number three, they might take turns in the sense that they take turns who chooses which movies to watch or something. And then you could still even have market pricing where, you mow the lawn. And clearly, what happens is that different cultures use different combinations of these types of relationships. Vary in frequency. That's right. In many tribal societies, it's communal that nobody can own the land. And this is true in a lot of other cultures, including China and Brazil in particular, which is why many Chinese and Brazilian immigrants want to come to the United States because we can own land, something that's just not possible. You find in many, many, many Asian contexts, a hierarchy is all that matters. Once you have established a hierarchical relationship in many Asian cultures that determines particular behavioral patterns, who bows lower, who uses the honors form, things of this nature. Equality matching tends to be more common in again, subsistence societies, rotating credit unions, that is to say, um, in very areas with high levels of poverty, they might have a system in place where they'll get together with, say, 12 friends, and once a month they get together and they all bring in $50. And then one name gets picked out of the hat, and then the winner gets $600. Okay. And so then you continue to do this until all 12 people have, in fact, received the windfall of $600. The logic being most of these poor farmers or poor people can in fact scrape up $50, but there's no way they can ever scrape up 600. And so using this mechanism, they can then once a year have this windfall of $600 to make some major investment in some family business or something. Okay. Um, One of the biggest findings in Western social psychology is the notion of social loafing. And that is American people, when they are put into a group and you cannot identify the effort of an individual, you can see right here, this is the three different lines here. If an individual was working on their own, their performance level is 25 if they're by themselves. If they're in a group that is they're in group, their performance drops to 17. If they're in a group that's strangers, they're at 17. But you can see what happens in particular in the Chinese, but also in the Israeli, but Chinese in particular, is that the performance by the Chinese people here are highest when they are not alone, but when they're with their group. And it's not just any group, it's their in group. So they instead of a social loafing that is found in a Western context, they exhibit a social striving, but only if they're working with their in group. Another interesting perspective differences is competition versus cooperation. And you can imagine individualistic cultures that focus on more of individualistic outcomes are more likely to be competitive than cultures that are much more collectivistic. So what they did was they took children here, and it turns out there's going to be some children from American children and some Mexican children. And they're going to put them in this little game here. And in this game, it's a game with marbles. And what happens is they've got strings and there's a marble connected in between the middle there. And what happens is if you can get the marbles into the little basket here by your end, this little girl, if you can get a marble, you take them home. Okay. But what happens is if these two kids go my marble and just both pull on the string at the same time, the marble falls out, falls off the edge of the table. Nobody gets the marble. Okay. So the way to win at this game is to cooperate with each other and say, okay, I'll take the marble this time and you take the next one. So the girl then pulls it and the little boy lets go of the string and allows her to have the marble with the understanding that next time he gets the marble. Okay? So what you find here is when they looked at little children here again, Mexican children and American children, what they found was especially here, what's most interesting is like by 10 and 11 years old, what happened was at the beginning, 10-year-old Mexican children, or no, American children, they were just habitually saying, no, my marble, my marble. Their reflexive response was, so at the beginning of this game, basically nobody was getting any marbles, none, because automatically when put into that game, mine, okay? You look at the 10 to 11-year-old Mexican children and you can see that's not the case. When they were put into this task where cooperation was the solution, they did not reflexively fall back on competitive responses. They took some considerations. They got about half the marbles. And as the game proceeded, they did in fact get more marbles. Okay? So the interesting thing here is quite strong. The American children have been socialized. Competition is the default, whereas these Mexican children have been socialized that cooperation is the default. And negotiating, finally. When you negotiate, there's really two different ways to negotiate. You can be adversarial or confrontational or something like that, or you can compromise. And so what happens is in adversarial strategies, one side, my side is the only one I look at. And what you find is in negotiations, that is in fact what happens in individualistic cultures. Okay? Creates quite a conflict. Compromising strategies, which are more likely in collectivistic cultures, neither party truly gets what they want, but they make considerations about what each will receive. And in the end, compromising strategies tend to lead to the best outcomes.